Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. We continue with the Hardy Boys hunting for hidden gold. Chapter 5. Con Riley Under Fire. The blizzard died down as suddenly as it began, and when the Hardy Boys and their chums left the cabin, they found that the snow had ceased falling and that the sun was shining brightly. They found Jadbury Wilson's long sled tied to the outside of one of the cabin walls. It had been unharmed, and it did not take the boys long to place blankets upon it and make the old man comfortable. They had to assist him out of the cabin, so greatly did his injuries pain him. He had 2 pair of snowshoes, and Chet Morton and Jerry Gilroy donned them, the Hardy Boys being content to trudge along in the deep snow of the lake. In a short time they had left the cabin and were making their way towards Willow River, pausing frequently to rest because the deep snow soon wearied them. However, when they reached the river, they found that they made better progress because the stream was protected by high wooded banks, and the snow had not drifted as deeply as on the lake. But it was mid-afternoon before they reached the road leading into Bayport. From there on, their progress was easy, and dragging the sled with Jadbury Wilson wrapped in his blankets, they at length reached the Hardy home on High Street. Here they were all welcomed by Mrs. Hardy and Aunt Gertrude, who had been frantic with anxiety concerning the boys' whereabouts. "We were going to send out a search party for you," exclaimed Mrs. Hardy, as she kissed her sons and sent Chet and Jerry in to telephone to their parents the news of their arrival. "I knew they'd get lost. I told them so," declared Aunt Gertrude vigorously. But if she had a scolding in store for them, she soon forgot it in her immediate concern over Jadbury Wilson, whom Chet and Jerry brought into the house. When the Hardy Boys explained the situation and told of their adventures and the reason for their delay, Mrs. Hardy was insistent that Jadbury Wilson should make his home with them until he could be on his feet again. "You'll certainly have to stay with us," she said. "There's plenty of room." "I'm sure I'm most thankful to you, ma'am," said the old prospector humbly. As for Aunt Gertrude, she was already scurrying about the kitchen, making hot ginger for the new guests, and when it was ready, she stood over Jadbury Wilson until he had drunk the last drop. Then the boys put him to bed, and as the old man relaxed into the warm blankets, he sighed and remarked that it was the first time in 5 years that he had experienced the comforts of a soft mattress. Jerry and Chet hastened home, wondering a little what would be said to them, but their people were so relieved to see them again that they forbore to lecture the lads, and all in all, they came through the ordeal better than they had expected. "Back to school tomorrow," grumbled Joe at supper that night. "No, didn't I tell you?" said Mrs. Hardy. "Tell us what?" "There won't be any school tomorrow." "What?" shouted the boys incredulously. "You should say, 'I beg your pardon,'" corrected Aunt Gertrude acidly. Mrs. Hardy smiled. "I thought you'd be surprised," she said, "and I suppose you'll be almost heartbroken. No, there's to be no school tomorrow. Last night's blizzard was one of the worst in history of Bayport. The wind was so strong that it wrecked the high school roof." Joe gave a whoop of delight and danced around his chair. "There's nothing to cheer about that I can see," sniffed Aunt Gertrude. "They say the property damage was very bad, and it will take about 2 weeks before the roof is fixed." The news proved too much for the Hardy Boys. Like most youths of their age, the unexpected prospect of a winter holiday filled them with delight. Mrs. Hardy smiled at them indulgently, for she had not forgotten her own school days. Aunt Gertrude began laying down the law to the effect that the boys must pursue their studies at home, quite as ardently as though the school had been undamaged, and on the following day she actually did insist that they do 2 hours' study before they go out into the morning. When the boys finally made their escape and raced to the nearest hillside with their bobsleds, they found most of the students of Bayport High School already there. Tony Prideaux, Phil Cohen, Biff Hooper, Chet Morton, and Jerry Gilroy were all on hand. For half an hour or more the sledding continued, the boys having the time of their lives, and then Nemesis appeared on the scene in the person of Officer Con Riley. Now, as old readers know, Riley was the sworn enemy of the youth of Bayport, a stolid, thick-set individual with more dignity and self-importance than brains. He took the responsibilities of his position on the Bayport police force very seriously. He had the view too common of the type of elderly people who have forgotten that they once were young, that all enjoyment is sinful, and that all young people are continually up to mischief. So when Con Riley saw the merry party on the hillside, he recollected an ancient and obsolete city ordinance forbidding bobsledding elsewhere than in the parks. This ordinance had originally been passed to prevent youngsters sliding down hills adjacent to the trolley tracks and thereby endangering their lives. The fact that there were no trolley tracks near this particular hill mattered nothing to Officer Riley. Majestically he stood at the top of the hill and held up his hand. Sled after sled pulled to a stop, and Officer Riley, the personification of the majesty of the law, ordered the fun to cease. There was nothing to be done. Officer Riley had the authority, and he knew it. "Well," said Chet Morton grimly, "we'll just have to have our fun some other way. Let's have a snowball fight." Officer Riley looked dubious and produced a little notebook, which he pursued earnestly. He knew Chet Morton and his mischievous proclivities of old. But although he looked through the rules and regulations hopefully, he could find nothing to prohibit snowballing. However, he withdrew to the street and paced slowly up and down in the faint hope that perhaps a stray snowball might break a nearby window, in which case he would have a delicious opportunity to interfere once more with the sport. Chet gathered his cohorts and talked earnestly for a few minutes. Then, with many giggles, his followers set to work building 2 snow forts directly opposite one another. The forts were merely rude snow embankments, just sufficient to provide protection for the opposing sides. Then the young people began rolling snowballs. So far so good. Officer Riley was unable to detect anything wrong in this. Still, the fight had not started. There was still the hope of a shattered window pane. Majestically he paced to and fro, keeping an eye on the snow forts and the gaily clad figures behind the banks. And then, to his surprise, he saw Chet Morton walking slowly towards him. Officer Riley eyed Chet suspiciously. The fact did not escape him that Chet had one hand behind his back. "Aha!" he muttered. "A snowball." He was right. Hardly had the suspicion crossed his mind than it became a frigid reality. Chet seemed to aim at one of the forts, but his foot appeared to slip, and the snowball smacked Con Riley's helmet with deadly accuracy, knocking it off into the snow. Riley emitted a roar of rage and astonishment. Snow was trickling down his neck. He stooped merely long enough to pick up his helmet, thrust it back on his head, where it rested at a ridiculous and rather precarious angle, and then he gave chase to the rash youth who had just tempted wrath. Chet went plowing through the snow, directly in between the forts. Con Riley plunged recklessly in pursuit. Even yet he did not suspect the trick, did not suspect that Chet was merely luring him on to destruction. Not until a second snowball whizzed past his head, and not until a third smacked wetly against his ear, did he realize that he had plunged neatly into a trap. He floundered about in snow up to his knees, From either side came a volley of snowballs. They squashed against his helmet, knocking it off again, and then thumped it against his uniform on every side. No matter which way he turned, flying snowballs met him, and the boys took good care to keep their faces out of sight. "Stop it!" he roared. But the merciless bombardment continued. He made a frantic rush towards one of the forts, but the snow was too deep to permit the rapid progress, and the air seemed full of white missiles. One snowball caught him in the eye and stopped his rush momentarily. He wavered. More snowballs caught him in the rear. He turned round, and concerted bombardment opened up from each fort. Officer Riley decided that discrimination was the better part of valor, and he ignominiously retreated. As for Chet Morton, he was safely enclosed behind a particularly heavy snowbank, laughing until the tears came to his eyes. And when next he peered out, he saw that Officer Riley, having retrieved his precious helmet, was making great speed back towards the comparative safety of the sidewalk, with the greatest dignity that he could command under the circumstances. He brushed the snow off his uniform, and then, sadly, he resumed his beat, and headed towards the downtown part of Bayport, where citizens were more law-abiding, and where snowballs were unknown. The Hardy Boys and their chums saw their enemy disappear around the block, and then Chet rose to the top of the ramparts and gave a cheer of victory. "We have met the enemy, and they are ours," he quoted. A snowball from the opposite fort struck him on the ear, and he sat down abruptly. And then the fight began in earnest. It was not until Chet had personally led his warriors out of their fortress and across the no-man's land between to win a glorious victory over the other army, and had personally washed the face of the marksman who had ruined his triumphant cheers, that peace was restored. And then, the forts having been demolished, the bobsleds were pressed into service again, and the hill rang with shouts and laughter until nightfall, where Officer Con Riley made it his business to attend to duties downtown for the rest of the day. Chapter 6. A Message from Montana. When the Hardy Boys returned home that night after their afternoon's fun, and sat down to an ample hot dinner of steak and onions, with mashed potatoes, thick gravy, and all the trimmings, as Jadbury Wilson expressed it, they found that the old miner had won a firm place in the household. He was able to be up and around again, although he hobbled painfully about. But his tales of the early days in the mining country of the West had won the interest of the women. Mrs. Hardy was particularly interested when he talked of Montana, because of the fact that her husband was in that particular state at the time. As for Aunt Gertrude, she was in a constant condition of solicitous excitement, seeing that the old man was comfortable, and comfortable he was. It was a treat to see him relax in an easy chair after dinner, puffing contentedly at the pipe that he never allowed out of his sight. In the evening, Frank and Joe besought him to tell again the story of how he had been so basely cheated of his fortune in the West, and the women listened, entranced, to the strange tale. "Do you mean to tell me that that wicked man actually ran away with all the gold you had worked for so hard?" exclaimed Aunt Gertrude indignantly. "Looks that way, ma'am. The scoundrel! I just wish I had him here for a minute. I'd tell him a few things." "I'd tell him a few things myself," said Wilson mildly. "Still, it was a great many years ago, and there's no use talking about it now. The gold's gone. I'm an old man." "It's a shame," said Mrs. Hardy. "I guess I couldn't have been much as a prospector, or I'd have been able to hold on to what I got," observed Wilson. "I've come to the conclusion that a man gets pretty much what he deserves in this world. If he ain't smart enough to hold on to what he's got, he deserves to lose it." "Didn't you make anything out of your mining days at all?" put in Frank. "Oh, a few dollars here and there. Enough to keep me in grub and with a place to sleep. Once in a while I'd make some extra money, but it never lasted long somehow. I got a claim out in Montana yet, so far as that goes." "Is it worth anything?" Jadbury Wilson shrugged and stroked his beard. "Maybe worth much, maybe worth nothing," he said. "Can't you find out?" "I haven't got enough money to work the property. It's the only claim I've been able to pay my dues on all these years. But I kept paying 'em, sort of hoping something would turn up and some day. I've always thought it should be a good claim. It's in a good location, but I've never had enough money ahead to do any more work on it." "Can't you get anyone to finance you?" asked Joe. "Not me," sighed the old man. "All through Montana I got the reputation of being too unlucky. They're afraid to take a chance on me any more. They say, 'Why, that's Jed Wilson's claim. Even if it is good, he's always been so all-fired unlucky that he'll be bound to lose our money,' so they pass it up." "Never mind. Perhaps you'll come into your own some day," said Mrs. Hardy, comforting. "It'll have to come mighty soon then," replied the old man with a wry smile. "I've waited so long now that it seems I'll be dead and gone before my luck starts to turn." However, under the influence of the warm fire and the cheerful company, his natural optimism manifested itself, and he was soon entertaining his new-found friends with stories both humorous and tragic of his adventures in the early days of the rough-and-ready mining camps of the West. "I'd love to go out there," said Joe wistfully. "It ain't all beer and skillets," said Jadbury Wilson. "There's quite a bit of adventure, but there's a lot of rough living and mighty skimpy eating at times. I've often seen the day when all my flour and beans would be gone and the grocer wouldn't trust me for another nickel's worth. And of course the West has changed a lot nowadays. It's got mighty civilized, they tell me." "Our father is out in Montana now," Frank remarked. "You don't say. And whereabouts in Montana is he?" "He's at a mining camp. It's a funny-sounding place called Lucky Bottom." Jad Wilson's eyes widened. "Lucky Bottom!" he exclaimed. "Can you beat that?" "Why?" "Lucky Bottom is right near the place where Bart Dawson ran away with all our gold." "Isn't that a strange coincidence?" ejaculated Mrs. Hardy. "It sure is," agreed Jad Wilson. "Mighty strange to think that he should be in the very place where we lost our fortune. It's a small world, ain't it?" "What kind of place is Lucky Bottom?" asked Frank. "It ain't very big. In the old days it was a real rough-and-ready mining camp with dance halls and saloons, and then as the mines got worked out and the miners went up into the copper fields, and the town sort of dwindled away. It's a sort of ghost camp nowadays, I guess. Nobody there but a couple of storekeepers and a few miners who keep plugging away, still hoping to find some gold that somebody else had missed." Jadbury Wilson rubbed his eyes and smothered a yawn. "You'll have to pardon me, ma'am," he said to Mrs. Hardy, "but I've always been used to going to bed at dark, and it ain't often I sit up so late jawing. If you don't mind, I think I'll turn in." "Early to bed, early to rise," quoted Aunt Gertrude with approval. "Makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise," finished Jadbury Wilson with a wry smile. "Well, I've been getting up early and going to bed early all my life, and it's never made me wealthy, and I'm mighty sure I ain't very wise. But all it's done is to make me healthy. You couldn't kill me if you belted me over the head with a church." He bade them good night and went upstairs to bed. Aunt Gertrude remarked that the Hardy boys would be well advised to follow the old man's example in the matter of early retirement, but they sat up for almost an hour before the fire, talking over some of the yarns the old miner had recounted. "He sure had some great experiences," said Frank before they went to sleep that night. "You bet he did. I wish we could get out there for a while. It's probably wouldn't be the same now," he said. "The country has got pretty tame." "It can't be so tame when they have to call Dad out there for their gold-stealing cases. And there must be some excitement left." "Oh, well, there's not much chance of us getting out there. Go to sleep." But in the morning a surprise awaited for them. When they came down to breakfast, they found Mrs. Hardy already at the table, pursuing a yellow sheet of paper. "Telegram?" said Frank. Mrs. Hardy nodded. "It's from your father." "Is he coming back?" "Not yet. As a matter of fact, he wants you boys to go out to him at once." Frank and Joe looked at one another incredulously. The news seemed too good to be true. Mrs. Hardy handed over the telegram. It read, "Please let Frank and Joe come to me at once. We'll send special word and instructions to Majestic Hotel, Chicago, Fenton Hardy." "What on earth can this call mean?" exclaimed Frank in complete amazement. "I can't understand it at all," admitted their mother. She was frankly worried. "I don't care whether I understand it or not," said Joe. "It means he wants us to go out west, and that's enough for me. When can we start?" "The telegram says at once," said Mrs. Hardy. "It seems very strange, and so sudden too. I wonder what on earth he can want you for." "Perhaps he needs our help on that case he's working on," Frank suggested. Aunt Gertrude, who had hitherto taken no part in the discussion, sniffed audibly. The Hardy boys were so excited that they could hardly eat their breakfast. All through the meal they jubilantly discussed details of the proposed trip, and when Mrs. Hardy, although admittedly worried at the prospect of letting them go so far by themselves, agreed that they might go immediately. As the telegram suggested, they flung themselves into a feverish orgy of packing. Jadbury Wilson was highly interested, and gave them a number of excellent suggestions as to what they should take with them on the trip. "Lots of good heavy underclothes, and plenty of woolen socks," he said. "You'll find it plenty colder out there than it is here." The boys got their reservations on a train that would leave for Chicago late that afternoon. Their packing occupied more time than they had expected because they did not want to be burdened by too much luggage and had a difficult time eliminating the non-essentials. At last, however, they were ready. Aunt Gertrude, who had kept up a running fire of instructions and admonitions concerning their conduct on the journey, and who freely predicted disaster to the shape of train wrecks and robbers, gave them her final instructions. Mrs. Hardy, who merely kissed them good-bye and told them to write to her as soon as they reached Chicago, called a taxi to take them to the station, and Jadbury Wilson, warning them to be on the lookout for them city slickers in Chicago, and advising them not to talk to strangers, told them not to worry inasmuch as he would look after their mother and Aunt Gertrude. The taxi arrived. The luggage was tossed in. The boys scrambled into the back seat. Aunt Gertrude shrieked, "Goodbye," a dozen times and sobbed audibly. Their mother waved a handkerchief. Jadbury Wilson brandished his cane, and then with a roar the taxi sped down the street and headed towards the station. Already the boys could hear the long-drawn whistle of the train. "Off for Montana!" exclaimed Frank. "I'm afraid of only one thing," remarked his brother. "What's that?" "I'm afraid I'll wake up and find I've been dreaming." And we'll continue this book next Friday or Saturday. Thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.